Hey, welcome back to Full Time, presented by Amazon Business. I'm Tamerra Griffin. Last week, in case you missed it, the NWSL submitted an application to US Soccer to create its very own second division league. And that got us thinking at Full Time. What is the landscape of American women's soccer right now? Where does a second division league fit into that? Who do they serve, and why are so many of them popping up right now? Like I said, there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to explain, a lot of questions as always. And you know I can't do this by myself. I am joined by my co-host, Meg Linehan. Meg, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm in a new location. If you're watching the video, you're going to realize that my background is different. But yeah, it's spring.
Got the standing desk going.
I got the standing
with
desk
massager
going.
mat.
I know. It's a real setup. You can see, maybe later we can play the game of who is that bobblehead behind me. Yeah, it's spring, things are springing. Vermont green season is around the corner. So things are going. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm well. I am really into this transitional season of renewal, of purging, the spring cleaning. I am back in Northern California, and it's actually been like proper spring. Like some days are super warm, some are like dreary and a bit wet. I went to the Bay FC Seattle Reign game over the weekend, which was a lot of fun. They fed us burritos in the press box. Thank you so much for that. More teams need to do that. But I'm good. I'm excited to dig into all of this because I'm not going to lie. The onslaught of the news of all of these second division teams in such a short period of time was a little bit overwhelming for me. So I'm glad that we could walk through it together.
Totally. I do think at some point, I don't know, maybe it's too inside baseball, but there's a real power ranking of press box food that could be happening.
Yes.
That's something that people might not always think about, but I definitely remember the days of NWSL games where we were lucky to get a bottle of water and a bag of chips. So at least we have come further than that. I'll put it that way.
Yes, we love growth. We love growth on this show, in our full-time verse. All right, before we get to the rest of the show, if you're not already following us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, make sure you are. At @TA Fulltime is the handle. And if you are already following us on socials, you've probably noticed some cool new videos we've been posting, like the ones that my colleague Asla Pellet has been hosting. Don't worry, there is so much more where that came from. And if you like watching these shows on YouTube, just a reminder that this very full-time show and full-time review are now available in full on YouTube. So many reasons to be following us on socials, I'm telling you. All right, me and Meg are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. All right, Meg, you and Asla were at the top of this reporting when the NWSL submitted that application to US Soccer for the second division league. Can you sort of walk us through, for those who have not read the piece, again, gentle reminder, it's up at The Athletic right now. What are we looking at here? What actually happened when this application was submitted?
Yeah, there's a few things. And first, shout out to Pardeep Khatri at CBS Sports, who had the story first. We were eventually able to review this paperwork. Basically, anytime you want to start a new league, you have to go through US Soccer to get it sanctioned. And they will figure out, do you actually meet the minimum requirements that are supposed to be happening at whatever level league that you want to start. So NWSL is proposing a second division league, in theory, to start in 2026. We will probably talk about that in a second, but they listed a full 8 teams that are, in theory, again, going to start play in 2026. Bay FC, Kansas City Current, Gotham FC, North Carolina Courage, Orlando Pride, Racing Louisville, Seattle Reign, and Washington Spirit. And then, again, in theory, by 2030, every single team in the league would have a matching second division team. They would be using the same training facilities, the same stadiums, which is a very big question mark on how that would possibly work. And I think really, Tamerra, before we get into any of this, it's just really important to say that this is just a piece of paperwork as it stands right now. And it is a sanctioning application. It is not necessarily a functioning or working plan for the league itself. It is a proposal. And there's really no guarantee that this thing is going to get off the ground by 2026, that these 8 teams, you look at the statement that Racing Louisville gave us, and it was very much like, we're evaluating this possibility and we'll figure out if it makes sense for us. So even the teams that are listed in that document are not outright committing to this. And Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces to it, but that is kind of the Cliff Notes version of what we know. There's both the headline, and then Asla and I tried to hopefully answer some of your questions about what this could mean. But Tamerra, I want to turn it to you now too, because before this even happened, you had done reporting around WPSL Pro adding Cleveland to the mix, which is another potential D2 league starting in 2026. In theory, one that looks a lot more concrete. Could you maybe walk us through that one?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks before, I spoke with the Cleveland Soccer Group, who, if you do recall, had NWSL ambitions. Their bid fell through, but after that happened, they sort of took a step back and looked at what they had, looked at what the materials that they had already sort of generated to bolster the bid, which included 16,000 season ticket pledges. They had already committed $50 million to build a 10,000 seat capacity stadium in downtown Cleveland. These are like tangible things that reflect interest, that certainly reflect investment. And Cleveland Soccer Group decided that there was no use waiting to get that successful bid into the NWSL and to work with what they had right now. I think one theme that sort of applies to the WPSL Pro and a lot of other leagues right now is the sort of timeline of major international tournaments that are coming to the US within the next 5 years, and that's before we even get to 2031, the next Women's World Cup. So that has definitely accelerated, I think, a lot of the plans, and they are 100% about this. I think it was interesting that they've decided to build it out of the WPSL, which has been around for a very long time, and the way that it was described to me was sort of like a startup ambition mixed with the tradition of a league that has been around since the late 90s, and knows and has relationships that they can build on. They talked about wanting to attract players that maybe made it to the final cuts of the NWSL and have sort of timed the start of their season to make sure that those players can be accommodated. So, like I said at the top of the show, there are many second division teams to sift through, and this is yet another one.
Yeah, I mean, for those who are not as old and have been around as long as I have, WPSL kind of infamously was the gap year between WPS, Women's Professional Soccer, closing down in 2011, and NWSL starting in 2013. WPSL Elite teams like Chicago and Boston were in that league kind of playing college/amateur players. So there is some real history here for WPSL.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, mixing sort of old with new as this landscape continues to grow. All right. Because there is so much to sift through and a lot of questions, I think that our friend Jeff Rueter did an excellent job of both distilling those questions and offering some of his really sharp insight about where we are right now, what the NWSL is actually trying to do, placing it in the context of what's been done before, and giving us a sense of whether he thinks this is going to work or not. And I think we need to hear from him. So let's bring Jeff into the conversation and really dig into this NWSL proposal. All right. We are joined by someone who is becoming such a regular to the show, which makes me thrilled. Jeff Rueter of The Athletic, to discuss all of the things related to second division soccer and its place in this ecosystem. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. There was a lot to like brush up on like the state of this landscape, and it's so funny writing about it because it's like in a week half of this information is going to be dated, and there's going to be a million things that have rolled out. But very fun to like try to get a sense of where this pyramid is going and how it's really more of like two square Lego blocks on top of each other than an actual pyramid.
I love that visual only because Legos are very nostalgic. I'm here for that. For people who are not aware, Jeff wrote an incredibly informative and helpful article. If this podcast had like a regular syllabus, this piece would be at the top. It's called "A Lower Division League is Good for Women's Soccer, but is NWSL's Proposal the Solution?" Jeff, can you sort of walk us through what spurred this piece? Because as you've said, there was this deluge of announcements and news. And I'm grateful that you wrote this piece because it helped even me make sense of everything that's going on. But sort of walk us through what spurred the piece.
Yeah, I think, look, so it's not really much of a secret that I cover soccer of all genders, right? So, like, I've been covering the men's lower divisions in the United States for a decade now. And that landscape has been constructed in such a way where it's more of a marketplace than, like, a coherent structure. And so now that we're getting to a point of the evolution of women's soccer in the United States where they're building their own pyramid, it looks like they're taking U.S. soccer is using the same kind of blueprint that they used to construct the U.S. men's pyramid and saying that it can be similarly applied on the women's side. And so it's looking at, is that smart? Spoiler, I don't think so. Is that taking lessons and learning from previous mistakes? No, is my answer. And ultimately, is this going to be a framework that can achieve what the women's landscape needs right now, which is more playing opportunities, more staff development opportunities, and more clubs with staying power and stability that fans can fall in love with?
Jeff, I want to talk to you maybe before we even really get into these kind of dueling proposals for a Division II league. What do you think the difference is between a Division II league that is maybe like a true second tier and a reserve league?
Yeah, I think that you can look at the title of a reserve league and probably glean some of it, right? The ultimate idea is to grow ostensibly a bigger squad for these NWSL clubs. So the idea being that Angel City could launch a second team where players who aren't ready to get NWSL minutes, or players that they want to have training with the first team every day, so you don't want to loan them out to a Super League club or elsewhere, can stay in the market, get competitive games against other players in similar situations for other NWSL organizations, and build that sort of readiness so that, let's say you have injuries or an international call-up or like a lot of call-ups and suddenly you have to replace squad depth. You have players who have at least been playing a system usually very similar to the first teams as well. The trade-off, of course, with all of this is these are the second teams. And so therefore it's not much of an attendance draw. There really isn't usually much of a pull for an independent club to want to launch into this space because ultimately the focus and the priority is going to be on developing players for the NWSL club. So you're just kind of like a mini boss along their developmental paths if this is a video game. And the flip side of it then, of course, is the independent lower division. And you lose some of that stability, you lose some of that funding of NWSL owners. These are all going to be independent clubs, mostly, that would launch in this space. But the trade-off is it is the biggest part of its own structure. These clubs can stand on their own legs. They can be, the true like community assets that fans have been waiting for, and that maybe markets that you would look at. And markets is such a cold business word, right? But that's kind of exactly the point of this. Now it's like markets that couldn't make it into the NWSL either at the initial launch wasn't appealing enough, or now ownership cost they aren't able to afford it. Now they can still bring soccer into their backyard. I think it's usually a little more rough and tumble at times. I think a lot of it will come down to the quality of the people who are hired and who are organizing it and operating these clubs. But the flip side of it is it can be a lot more personal, a lot more grassroots. Fans can hope to have more direct access to this team. And I think at a lot of times those tend to be really, really helpful for like the romantics among soccer fans.
Oh, that's me.
I know. I started in this space, right? Like it was the pull for me too. I was a fan of a lower division team, and then I started podcasting about it and writing about it, and then the team went to the major leagues, and I kind of checked out on the fandom, and it really can do a lot to serve a fan base.
That makes a lot of sense. Jeff, one of the things I appreciated most about your piece is so often, especially in women's soccer, we see people trying to force the men's soccer structure onto the women's soccer conversation in ways that are unhelpful, further confuse a conversation, and exposing their sexism, let's be real. But in your piece, it actually made sense, and actually for me helped me better understand the arguments that you were trying to make. So to what extent do you think women's soccer could borrow from the men's structure or attempts at structures in the past? And where do you think that they should be flat out avoiding things that have been attempted before?
I think that on the men's side, the lower leagues, and especially the second division space, has actually been really useful for identifying where is there the strongest possible fan bases and like best soccer communities that maybe you wouldn't look at if you were just looking at a ranking of the most populated areas, metropolitan areas in the United States, right? Like if you think about the last decade, we've seen Orlando started as a lower division men's market. Minnesota started as one. Austin, San Diego, Nashville, Cincinnati. And some of these now have been very common places where U.S. Soccer will send the women's and men's national teams to play their games, because it's proven that there is a large community of support around the sport that otherwise may have been overlooked. So I think that that's something that's worth working for on the women's side, is also finding where are those communities. And they might not be the same communities, and I would argue you shouldn't expect them to be the same communities. Everyone should be treated differently. I think it's what's so exciting about Cleveland, frankly, is that Cleveland hasn't had a stable professional men's team in quite some time. And so really cool that this would be, the biggest soccer draw in town pretty much from day one, which is good and gives them a better platform to succeed. I think that what you don't want to have is right now U.S. Soccer has been granting sanctioning for multiple leagues at the same level at the same time. And this is something that happened on the men's side around 2019. There were from 2019 to 2021, there were 3 different men's leagues that applied and were granted third division sanctioning, and all 3 of them are still operating in some sense, and there's really no clarity of that level of the pyramid, which makes it difficult for players and coaches to know where they want to go, and makes it difficult for fans to trust that their team will be there next year. The flip side is then on the women's side, you've got NWSL and the USL-Super League on the first division side, and now you've got WPSL Pro and possibly, let's just call it NWSL 2. I don't know if you two have already come up with a name for it in this episode, but maybe off mic you've come up with a name for that we can't use here. But I think overall, those leagues are going to try to achieve very different things. One is going to be trying to bring more of that, let's identify those communities, and it might be hard, but the rewards might be bountiful. And one is we're doing this to help develop our first teams. I don't think those necessarily need to operate at the same level. I don't think that those necessarily need to be granted professional sanctioning at the same tier per se. It depends on why the NWSL wanted to go for second instead of third, I suppose. Because, granted, a lot of them would qualify for first, just because it's the same owners that do qualify for first division. But I think ultimately what it leads to is a fractured landscape that makes it very difficult for the neutral soccer fan, or even a soccer fan who's a fan of one specific team, to actually adequately understand the landscape of American soccer at a professional level, at all levels of the pyramid. And I think that usually that sort of confusion is a barrier for entry for fans who really want to get into American soccer. And so then you look and you say, okay, the WSL, I at least understand that. I've heard of some of these team names. I've watched it, and the W Champions League has been a big pull as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and watch more of that, because I don't have the brain capacity to try to understand what the second division landscape actually is.
All right, Jeff, before we let you out of here, if NWSL 2 Pro is not maybe the ultimate answer, what do you think is an answer for this moment right now?
I think that the third division space should also be launching at a similar platform, because you don't want to run into another situation where maybe in 4 years, let's say WPSL Pro stabilizes, let's say the NWSL 2 League stabilizes as well, and now you've got investors looking at the third division space, and then you have another open marketplace sort of approach where you have 3, 4, 5 different leagues maybe going at this. I think having some sort of coherent vision, I wish that there was that sort of intentional curation that U.S. Soccer has done at times when establishing first divisions, or initial first divisions, I guess in the case of the women's pyramid, but actually looking and saying, how are we going to set this up to succeed? So maybe what it is first division. Yes, you need to have your best, your brightest. Second division, it should be something that's perfect as a developmental platform and true community aspects. Third division, I think you could get regionalized. I think that's where you say they can't afford the travel costs, so then you have the Northeast, the Southeast, the Midwest, whatever, setting up their own pockets. They kind of own, it's sort of what you see in the fourth division, the amateur space, right? With the W League and with WPSL, you see more of that. You're playing local rivals. You're not necessarily seeing Minnesota Aurora always playing games against Greenville Triumph, right? So I think overall that's a goal. It's aspirational, but I think ultimately we just need clarity, and it'll be the real proof of concept being actualized will be when these clubs can operate sustainably year after year after year, and fans can trust that their club will be there next year. This league is here for the long haul. And ultimately, I think that just takes some really careful design and implementation of these league structures, and only time will tell whether or not that work is being done.
I mean, look how long it took for the NWSL to actually solidify itself as a sustainable league, and that's Division One. So to your point, this is both going to be a long game, which means more conversations with you. I just want to say, I don't have a full nickname, but I was thinking about what you said about square Legos, and I'm wondering if the SL and NWSL we can work in the square Legos of it all. I'm just going to leave you with that, and we can brainstorm offline.
Go to Legoland, go to the Lego store. You can get individual bricks, and one by one, we'll slowly sort of figure out how we need to build this set for others. It's helpful.
The metaphor is taking shape. Jeff, thanks again for joining us.
Anytime.
All right, Meg, we've heard from Jeff. We have some reservations about what the NWSL is trying to do with the second tier. But we need to start bringing in even more voices, because there have been people who have been involved at the second tier level for a long time and have strong visions and opinions and experience about some of the themes, I guess we can say, that really form the foundation of what it means to build a league in general, but certainly a second division league.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about the pyramid as it exists right now, and there are these two unsanctioned leagues sitting at the bottom between WPSL and USL-W league right at the moment. So there is this kind of whole other landscape out there that when we're having this conversation about the NWSL entering the D2 space, that we're almost glossing over that sometimes, right? It's like really hard to just even wrap your arms around that whole state of the game in America. And as we were trying to talk through this episode, Tamerra, I think one of the things that really struck us was there's a way to almost kind of think about this, the themes of building a league, building a team right now is there's kind of three pillars that you need to think about. And as we were discussing, we came up with three: commercial, player development, and community. And let's maybe start with commercial, which feels like the most mercenary maybe sometimes, but also like is a piece of this that we can't overlook, right?
It's true. I mean, I think especially when we're talking about a second division league. When the NWSL announced that this application had been submitted, when the news of that application came out, I think part of the reason it generated so much commotion was because it's the NWSL. Anything they do now is news, which is a sign of growth. But with the second division league, maybe not so much. Maybe if you live in a city that has a USL-W team or a Super League team, you know about this. But otherwise, we have to talk about it. And there are a lot of questions, valid questions, I think, about how these teams plan to fill stadiums, what the merchandise is going to look like. What does revenue look like? Is that going to be shared? What about media rights? I mean, these are really, really localized questions. And I'm sure that each market is going to have a slightly different answer. But when a league does not necessarily have the benefit of being or becoming a household name, I think that commercial reach is really crucial, especially if we're thinking about sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, for the NWSL League 2, just in theory, right, you're putting two teams with the same brand in the same market, in the same stadium. So what is going to be the commercial appeal of essentially a reserve squad for any NWSL team, right? Especially, I mean, Seattle was one of the cases that I used in the article that Alza and I wrote of, you're going to open up Lumen Field, a capacity of 68,000 plus for a Division II team. It doesn't seem to make the most financial sense, which is why I think when we're talking about the next pillar, player development, that seems to be the one that the NWSL is hitting on so hard. But player development is something that is shared by every league, every proposed league in this pyramid right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would be hard pressed to find a league at any level that is not interested in player development. You can't really have a team if you don't value that. It's been interesting speaking with different people who are coming at these leagues from various perspectives about player development, because everyone has a slightly different vision about the kind of player that they want to attract. When I spoke with Cleveland Soccer Group, for example, they described a profile of anyone from, someone who graduated from college and knew that even if the draft still existed, they might not be able to break in that way. Maybe they're a walk-on, to a player who maybe has played in the NWSL for the bulk of their career and is sort of at the end of their tenure, but still wants to keep playing. Maybe wants to play closer to home. Maybe is open to the idea of playing while having another job to supplement that income. There's such a range of players that if they're not in the NWSL, if they're not playing for one of the top international teams, can sail under the radar. And so I think is going to be really important to be asking that question of these leagues, because there needs to be a vision in order to know how to attract that player.
Yeah, vision, very, very important. And then the final piece of this too is community, right? And
big piece.
I brought up Vermont Green, obviously at the start of the show. That to me is kind of like the ultimate proof of concept when it comes to community. And that's a 4th division team on the men's side, right? Where it is truly a player development thing, but it has become such a huge and massive piece of the community here in Burlington. But when you think about filling a stadium, feeling represented, feeling like it has real ties, especially for potentially either an unsanctioned league or a Division II league where players are coming in and out a lot faster. Like they might only spend 6 months, 3 games. Chris Petrucelli talked about that with Dallas Trinity in USL-Super League even, right? Even at a D1 level, where the time spent with these players might not be as long. So how do you build those relationships? How do you engage community interests? How do you, especially outside of NWSL markets, right? Mm-hmm. NWSL is going to have a very interesting premise trying to build community around a second division team when they are still working to build a community around the first division team. So there's so many pieces to this, Tamerra. There's just so many pieces.
I know. It's like, pick a game metaphor. Is it Legos? Is it a puzzle? Is it, there are a lot of moving parts, but as we said, all the more reason to bring in even more voices as we discuss this. And what I appreciate about this show is we really care about geographic diversity, because we made sure to speak to someone from California, someone from Texas, and someone from Minnesota, because different markets, different cultures, different ambitions, all necessary to help us better understand where we are right now and where we're going. So should we start with community? Because I think when I think of the second division league, that to me is probably the most distinct part, just because the relationship between a lower division team and its community has always felt special, even when you look abroad. We've been starting to see more and more as the NWSL continues to expand that they are making efforts, some teams, to really build those ties with the community. But outside of the NWSL, it looks really, really different. I think we need to go to Minnesota and see how they have approached community building and how they imagine taking their community with them, even as their ambitions continue to grow.
I am Andrea Yoch. I am a co-founder and board member for Minnesota Aurora, a community-owned team based in the Twin Cities.
And when you think about a second division women's league specifically, what role does community play there? It seems like a really unique relationship and not one that you typically see at the first division level.
Yeah, so I think in all of our conversations about what's next for Aurora, they always start with wherever we're going next, our community owners are coming with us. Right? They are the fabric of why we're successful. They are why people know who we are. And so no matter where we're going, the community owners are coming with us, right? We're not ditching anybody at the altar. And I think that that's what's going to make us successful in wherever we go next, right? Because you've seen teams work really hard to get a season ticket campaign going, get deposits going, sign up for a petition. Well, guess what? We already have 7,000 people showing up for our games and walking around with our jerseys and spending a lot of money on merchandise, watching on TV. We come with all of that, and it starts because of our community owners. So any league that wants us is going to want our community owners, because frankly, they would be dumb not to take the whole kit and caboodle of all of us, right? We together make up Minnesota Aurora.
I mean, Andrea, when you're looking at everything that's been going on over the past, especially past couple of weeks in this landscape of women's soccer that feels both crowded and barren at the same time, like, where do you see things moving in the future in terms of all of these leagues coexisting, in terms of Minnesota finding a home? Like, Do you wanna maybe like look into your crystal ball a little bit and give us what you are seeing from your point of view?
We see opportunity, right? When we started playing in 2022, there weren't a whole lot of options for us. It was either stay where we are or go to the NWSL, right? There was no in between. And as that number to get to the NWSL gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the fact that now there are some other options is really great for us. Are we still sitting around waiting for our billionaire to show up and write the $200 million check so that we can, go big? Of course. But in the meantime, we want to offer more to our fans than 6 home games. They deserve more than 6 home games, but also to be a sustainable business, we need more than 6 home games. So when we see the news coming out about WPSL Pro, NWSL Division 2, the USL-Super League, what that is for us is opportunity for Aurora, right? It's a chance to figure out where are we going next? What is the next for us? And given how we've positioned ourselves and the success we've had, it's a great place to be for us right now.
As we mentioned, player development is a huge, huge component to any league, but not all teams have these sort of built-in ties the way NWSL teams can sort of more easily forge. So let's now go to California and hear how they view player development in the WPSL.
My name is Jamie Levoy, and I am the Executive Director for the California Storm.
And for someone who's been involved at this level for so long, I'm really eager to hear your perspective on this sort of recent wave of interest and movement when it comes to second division women's leagues. What do you think that for, everyone who's sort of wanting to get in on the ground floor right now, including the NWSL, what do you think anyone who is interested in developing a second division league in the U.S. needs to achieve?
I think it's fantastic that we're having these other opportunities because they haven't been there before. It was like, we didn't even have professional women's for a long time. And so now we have that, and it's well established and it's thriving in our country. I think it's really going to make it even stronger that we have these other tiers because it's going to provide that opportunity for players to go in and then funnel them into the first division. But also, it's so hit or miss and of if you can get into the first division. So we have so many players that are going overseas, and it would be great if we can keep them here, develop them, and build them into that first division league. And also, we're finally recognizing that these athletes can make a career out of this. So those opportunities are massive. I think what's going to be huge, though, is that the clubs create a very professionalized environment. That's something that it's also hit or miss on in the current other leagues, the pre-pro. I notice some are all in and then some are, okay, we show up, we play our game, and then that's it. So as long as we're treating these athletes and creating a game day atmosphere and everything and giving them the resources that they deserve, then I think that this could be really massive for the development of women's soccer in this country. We talked a lot about the players, but like you're mentioning the community. Personally, I never had a female soccer player that I looked up to. It was, I looked up to, Ronaldo, a different Ronaldo, you know what I mean? And it's like, so it's so important for us to have these women out here playing and accessible to the next generation of girls, that they're going to be the next generation of players.
Then, of course, we have to look at the first division and how it stands. How does the USL-Super League fit into this? I already mentioned talking to Chris, but let's go to Dallas and figure out their relationship with the NWSL and the ecosystem as a whole.
I'm Chris Petrucelli, General Manager, Dallas Trinity.
When you joined Dallas Trinity, how important was player development for the club as a whole?
I think when we were putting the roster together, we wanted, we knew, first of all, that the league was going to be young. So we were looking for a mix of young players and some veteran players, with the idea that the veteran players would help the development of the younger players. But we knew we were going to have a good number of maybe first or second year pros, and also a number of youth players because of the market we're in, having so many quality youth players. So we knew we were going to have a young group, and we knew we were going to have to develop them and hopefully, that development we're really early in those stages. We've seen some positives along the way, but there's a lot of work left to be done.
In terms of, giving players like this opportunities to get real professional minutes, where would you put player development, I guess, in Dallas's overall list of priorities as a team? Is that number one? Is that, okay, we got to function as a team first?
Yeah, I think you always, we're trying to win a championship, right? So that's always going to be number one, all right? But I think player development is pretty high up there, and I think it's gotten higher on the list actually as the season has gone on, as we've been able to see, what we're capable of and what the league can do, working with some of the local youth clubs and really borrowing their players. They're playing with us, they're playing with them sometime, but we're seeing for the elite youth player playing the club games, that they're winning 5-0, that's just not enough, right? And getting those players first just in our environment, next maybe on the bench some, and then finally onto the field, like their growth, it's like nothing I've seen before, honestly. Like in short periods of time, these players that are really good players have grown even more and more.
All right, Meg, this has been a collection of enriching insights, to say the least. Now let's bring the NWSL back into this, because there's sort of this picture, against which we can hold the NWSL if, this application ends up being manifested into an actual second division league. We need to talk about sustainability. It was a huge topic when the NWSL first started and has been sort of the question mark lingering over the league for years. But does that sort of hold up right now to you when it comes to its ambitions tentatively for a second division league?
I mean, I get I think this was always a matter of time, right? And I think that there are certain markets that are going to be more ready for it than others. You think about Kansas City, right? Which I feel like is going to be one of the driving markets of, they've got the facilities, they've got the stadium, right? Like, this is in theory the perfect incubator for having a full setup, whether it's an academy, whether it's a second division team. So the problem is that I think everybody looking at the NWSL saying, hey, we want to launch a second division league, is everybody's like, okay, but what about the first division league? Like, there's still always going to be work to be done. And at the end of the day, the first division should always be the priority, you would think, right?
Yeah.
And so there's just so many big questions that we don't have answers to yet. But, will players be a part of the collective bargaining agreement between the Players Association and the league? How are they going to get paid? Are they going to get paid? What's that going to look like? How is health and safety going to work? Obviously, considering the history of this league, that's going to be a major question mark moving forward. There are still bigger questions about hiring practices at the NWSL across teams and the front office. And so I think there's just all these bigger projects of, the NWSL is never going to be a perfect project, but is it at a place where it can also sustain a second division that, at least as the plan stands right now, is going to be a huge, huge money suck?
Yeah, that price tag it's huge and it requires a lot of commitment. And one thing that I keep coming back to, I know Andrea mentioned that in Minnesota, the approach was that as long as they have player safety established, the community will follow. And when I think about what it means to create a sustainable second division league, especially from the NWSL's perspective, it's hard for me to imagine an emphasis of community not being a part of that, because you have to compel people from your market to be invested in your team beyond the NWSL, beyond that first division. And to me, when I think about homegrown players who are coming up through academies, playing for the second division, being able to follow a player's journey, follow a team's journey, I think is a huge part of that maybe is not quite yet normalized in the States. But when you look outside, that is how by the time someone reaches a senior team, they are bringing a whole literal community of people with them because they've been following. So for me, in terms of sustainability, the NWSL is going to have to dig even deeper into community and probably take a few pages out of the books of leagues that have been doing this for a while in order to create something that's going to be successful for a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that this is so tied to, right, and I think this was one of the things that I immediately started asking is, I just wrote about female coaches in the NWSL and the lack of them, and expansion is only going to make that problem harder. This is, in theory, also a training ground for coaches, technical staff, referees as well. So, like, there is going to be that plus to it. But I also think that the NWSL is looking at a second division because at the end of the day, if you're going to expand at the first division level, right, adding Denver and Boston in this first wave right now, and then potentially, I mean, Jessica Berman has dropped that 30 number, right? If you're going to sustain a league that big, you have to have multiple paths for development. And we're seeing the decline of influence from the NCAA game and the rise of younger players going abroad, right? And so Super League has helped fill that gap already. I think to Jeff's point, there was always, like, filling out the second division is a really good thing. Could the NWSL be thinking about third division instead of second? Potentially, right? Of just really trying to fill out and make it a pyramid rather than 2 by 2 as a square. But I don't know. I think there's just so many big questions about the NWSL's ambitions under Jessica Berman right now and what this is going to mean for the league itself that, again, we don't have enough information because as it stands, this really is at the proposal, the application stage. So much work is going to have to be done to get this league running, like to even exist.
And in less than a year, potentially. I mean, I'm thinking about timing too, in like a micro and a macro sense.
And just
they
like,
want to be up and running. Yeah.
Why are you trying to launch a Division II league at the same time you're trying to launch 2 expansion teams at the same year of a men's World Cup on American soil? Just like there
3
is
years
a limit
before an Olympics
to how many things can happen all at the same time.
It's true. And there is a part of me that can sort of empathize with the sense of urgency given what is coming up on the U.S. soccer schedule. Also, with the rapid growth of the sport and how many people are interested in it. Now, all of those people who are interested are not always coming with the right intentions. They're not always coming with a sustainability mindset. They treat, I think, sometimes this league as like a startup where fast fail is okay. We cash out and we move on, which can create way more problems than it solves. And I recognize the need to sort of address all of those issues and make sure that the path forward is we keep coming back to sustainability. So I understand to an extent why all of this is happening right now, but it does not mean that everything needs to happen right now, you know? Does that, I know, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I just, the other thing too is that I think the NWSL has to be a part of this conversation, right? Totally, because if you are the most historic Division I league in the country, you are going to have major influence in how this is working. But I think Jeff's column is, he really just hit on so many points that I was thinking about as I was covering this of what's the plan, like set aside NWSL, USL, WPSL, you have all of these established leagues who do have their own legitimate history, right? WPSL and USL as concepts predate the NWSL.
Yeah.
How can you work together to fill out this landscape in a way that makes sense rather than everybody trying to get a little piece of the pie? And I get it because there are obviously are like real commercial rewards that are out there, but is that the point? You know, like I think this is kind of the question that we've been asking ourselves is what is the point of a Division II league? What is the point of even an amateur league? And yes, there is always you have to survive as that team and you have to be able to say like, yes, we will be here next year. But beyond that, it really is player development, I think. And serving the community. Like, again, these 3 pillars just kind of keep popping up. And there has to be a way to actually get all these people around a table and being like, how do we work together and still serve our own commercial interests?
Yes.
And not step on each other.
The tension between the inherent competition in all of this, between each of these entities, and sort of the interdependence, because if they all can't figure it out, then it's not going to work. Like you said, people need to be entertained at the end of the day. So player development, you can't discount that. You got to be making money, so you can't discount the commercial. You got to build community to get people to care about teams that are not necessarily the first division. I do think it's worth mentioning that Carla Thompson was hired as NWSL Director of Youth Development last September, and they mentioned in the press release that her role as building connections between the league and the landscape of youth soccer, I think, will be important to keep in mind moving forward, because development is the name of the game, as you have heard.
Yep.
All right. I already know that this is not going to be the end of this conversation. How could it be? The way that things are going. I'm sure many of you have feelings about the NWSL's proposal. So if you do, you know how to reach us. DMs, email, fulltime@theathletic.com, @TA fulltime on the social platforms. We will keep those DMs open, checking them always to hear from you. It's a lot, but we're here to process it together. All right. Did you know that The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to deliver free best-in-class coverage of women's sports? If not, it's not too late to check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. I'm not even going to try to memorize it anymore. I'm just going to read it. I'm owning my truth. The link is in the show notes, though. All right, this has been Full Time. I'm Tamerra Griffin. I am going to be sucking down honey straws to protect my body from the pollen that is swirling around Sacramento right now on Blue Sky and Instagram.
I've been Meg Linehan. You can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky as well. And you can also, again, follow our show at TA Fulltime on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok.
Full Time is not possible without our podcast producer, Theo Lloyd Hughes, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our executive producer, Emily Olson. Thank you, as always, for listening, and we will see you next time.